So, you will see that we will touch many of the same points we already saw this morning, but from a different perspective. You know? Now we try to get to the important problem of how to translate this understanding we have of what happens into some precise technical tools. No? So we said that it is important to read what happens in terms of the dream of the session, meaning the unconscious communication, in order to try to understand what are the emotions at stake. And how we do this? We go after the characters that appear in the analytic narratives, because behind each character somehow there is an emotion, or the character can be seen, and the plot, the narrative, as an allegorical way of expressing and trying to give a form to an emotion that is still waiting to be transformed. So the idea here is that we should develop some instruments in order to get in tune with this dream of the couple. So there is the idea of a spectrum of the oniric, meaning that we can use different ways. The ones that I will illustrate here are, of course, the dream that was already in the first paper, then the concept of the dream of the night, how we treat the dream of the night, then we see the concept of transformation in hallucinosis, transformation in dream, and reverie. And I will give a few examples. But before going to that, at the beginning of the paper, still there are some, again, an introduction to a theoretical introduction that we will read. I gave this paper to in Seattle 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago. There was every 2 years there is a conference on the theory of object relations, and that's why I was invited there. Bion's theory of the analytic field takes the Freudian paradigm of dream. So, excuse me for the repetitions, but on one side they can be useful, and it's not always said in the same way. On the other side, it's because these were different papers meant for different occasions. So, Bion's theory of the analytic field takes the Freudian paradigm of dreaming to its extreme consequences, but reinscribes it in a radical, let's say, intersubjective frame. The meeting of patient and analyst gives rise to a third area, which is created by both, and which is greater than the sum of the initial parts. It's like music. In music, if you isolate a note or a pause, you cannot understand the melody. No? When they are all put together, then something more comes up. The metaphor used to describe this intermediary space, force field, is taken from physics. The unconscious communication between minds generates the turbulence which emerges in this field. This unconscious communication takes place through projective identifications and entails an effective and reciprocal interpersonal pressure to receive the projected elements. The pairing is a small group equipped with one mind whose job it is to transform these emotional storms into thought. The operation in itself involves psychic growth. Nevertheless, this operation concerns not only conscious thought, but also pre-verbal thought. Pre-verbal does not necessarily, however, mean asymbolic. The symbolic, that is, the field of language, and the rules which constitute it also expresses itself through sensory motor patterns written into the body. It could be claimed that the fetus is already exposed to the effects of the symbolic through the way in which in the uterus and then at birth the mother provides a semiotic core, a cradle which welcomes, envelops and protects, and which is made up of a myriad of rhythmically ordered sensory impressions. So this is the first way the mother, and through her culture, sociality, gives shapes to the infant. The concept of the unconscious, why it is important for us to develop this model? Because then it is for us easier to understand that with patients we do the same. We try to give birth to new ideas through the same means, meaning, again, not only translating what we understand into concepts and words, but also providing the patient with this kind of sensory, motor, emotional understanding. There are beautiful pages by Hegel where he writes about habitudine, which it's a concept that we all use, but no, it seems so banal. But the way he writes about it is wonderful, because he says it's a kind of concept of the body. It's a very important notion for us. So the concept of the unconscious, which inspires this model, is different from that of Freud. We touched this point before. The unconscious is seen as a psychoanalytic function of personality, something which is absorbed from the mother at birth as a growing capacity to give personal meaning by experience. To experience. Learning to think means learning to dream the real in order to make of it a phenomenal, knowable and livable reality. Dreaming is the place in which we repeatedly try to give substance to the mind, or rather, vice versa, to reintegrate the mind into the body. To restart what Winnicott termed personalization, a process which consists of the progressive integration of body and psyche. Dreaming produces a sort of poetry of life. Dreams use the same language as poetry. The ambiguity which characterizes them does not destroy meaning, but creates it, obliging us to see things from different perspectives. This function of the personality goes continually side by side with the conscious, like two faces of a Moebius strip. From the most primitive emotions to concepts, the somatic psychic processes by which the friction generated by the impact of the real on the portion of the reality, which is the individual subject, are digested, are arranged along a continuum. Not only do we dream at night, but also during the day, the process which Bion called wake and dream thought. This again, it's a very important point, because it means that Bion did not accept a clear-cut differentiation between primary and secondary process. And he substituted this with the idea that there is a continuum. And in fact, I think that there is, because even in our wakeful states, if we just release attention, immediately we notice that we start to dream, we start to think in the same way, in the same way, with the same language, with the same rhetoric that we use during the night. And this is still enigmatic, how we can go from a more focused way of thinking to a more dreamy state. I think that the attention is a very important function there. There were those Russian psychologists, I think Luria and Vygotsky, who wrote in a book that attention is our capability to switch toward a more linguistic, abstract way of thinking, or away from it. Still, of course, it remains enigmatic, the other differences between the night dream and the wakeful dream, but this is still a mystery even for neurosciences and so on. But for us, it is important to conceptualize this, I think, in terms of a continuum. The capacity to dream thus presupposes, but does not overlap with dreaming as a neurophysiological activity. It is not given at birth, or only in a very minor way. One of the most important Winnicott's reference that I always use, to me really expresses this point in a wonderful way, is where he says that the space, I don't know if I quote correctly, but the space of the dream has to be created. There is a wonderful essay, wonderful paper by him, and another one by Masood Khan on the same line. This means that even if a neurophysiological activity like dreaming, we can see it even in animals, but that is not dreaming. That is not dreaming. That is not our dreaming, because our dreaming is made also of language. It's a dreaming that it is already in the symbolic, and this space for dreaming as a human being has to be created. It's not given at birth. The baby, in fact, beyond right, is all conscious, and the complement to this conscious is the unconscious of the mother. The way in which the mother transmits her way of dreaming reality to the baby, how to carry out the operation of symbolization, which generates meaning like the psychic skin which protects us from the trauma of reality, is also the model for therapeutic activity. For this, we need precise technical tools which enable us to transform these theoretical constructs into a practice of care. The analyst needs to know how to put the processes of symbolization, dreaming of reality, which for some reason have become blocked in the patient, back on track. Dreaming becomes the via regia to the real. The way to draw near to it without being too exposed, the dark glasses which enable us not to be burned by the light of the sun. Dreaming in a session takes on different forms, from those which, so to say, fish more deeply into the depths of the unconscious, to those which remain more superficial. We might list them in order as follows: real night dreaming, somatic reverie, transformation in hallucinosis, oniric flashes, Meltzer, reverie, and transformation in dreaming. I will try to illustrate this with a series of short clinical examples, leaving reverie until last. The scope of this paper is in fact to define more clearly its outlines, starting from a comparison with the other instruments of the so-called dream spectrum in session. So let's start again from the dream, with a dream of mine that I called in honor of Ingmar Bergman, My Wild Strawberries, because this is a beautiful movie. No, maybe it's one of the most beautiful in absolute, and especially because there are those wonderful images of dreams, or better, nightmares. I dream of being examined by two ancient examiners with sagging wrinkles during my exam to become a training analyst. That was a few years ago. They speak to me in a foreign language. This really resembles, it's similar to one of the most beautiful nightmare in Bergman's movie. And I do not understand their questions. In the dream, I think, because I knew who were the people of my commission, of course, no? That is public. In the dream, I think that this is not my exam committee, and that they have found a way to reject me. This is a kind way to say it. The mind, educated way. The mind transforms, but you see how the dream is trying to make its work. Transform the anxiety of the exam into poetic images. And also gives me useful, well, transforms and doesn't transform, because here we are halfway between a dream and a nightmare. Yes, and all psychoanalytic institutional life is a nightmare. Transform into poetic images, and also gives me useful ideas on how to present myself. You see how this is to emphasize the cognitive value of dream, no? Without letting down my guard too much. And on how to keep in mind the rigidity of psychoanalytic institutions and their inclination to be dogmatic. No, why I say this? Because behind there is also an experience I had in Milan, at the center of Milan. I had just published a paper in the International Journal about, it was about beyond caesura, the concept of caesura. It was a nice paper, it was put in the first place, so they invited me in Milan to give this paper. And I was quite relaxed and I read this paper, and then I can tell you, they almost killed me. Really, and really for a few days, really, I was upset, and what happened? So I learned that more or less you shouldn't never lower your guard. No? Why? And it was the same. It was the same situation, because I arrived, of course, with many points, with many titles, and it was no. But you see, in the dream, the hypochondria of the dreams tells you, be careful. So, and I transformed these colleagues of the committee into people that were, I don't know, 150 years old. So, a nice hyperbole of, let's stop here. What else? What else? So this was just to try to show how what is the effort of the dream during the night, also to transform and give meaning to something, but a meaning that is emotional, and also a powerful cognitive value, and also, of course, pushes to action somehow, and organizes the field in which we live. The same dream told in a session would be, the analyst should ask himself, why now? Why this dream? No? What we are dreaming, or what is the patient dreaming of how we are living now the current situation. So the dream would not be so much interpreted and understood as belonging to the patient, but as possibly as a nice unconscious representation of what is going on. No? And so we wouldn't ask the patient to associate to any elements as if it was only his dream, but we would try to develop this narrative. No? Maybe even asking something, or contributing with one's own associations and reverie, to develop this process of symbolization, and not so much going after the hidden thoughts that are repressed and in custody in the jail of the unconscious. Now let's go to corporeal reverie. This is an idea that that we build meaning also through our body, because in our body there are all the patterns, the memories, the implicit memories of all the meaningful relationship we lived, and so this is a part of knowledge that cannot be clearly, of course, translated into precise words and concepts. No? It is as if, how could you explain how the chocolate tastes? You have only to eat it, because otherwise, or it is the kind of knowledge we have when we play the piano, or we drive a bike. So the same kind of knowledge is powerful, active in the way we live relationship. And sometimes in certain conditions, even in the analysis, there can be some actions or something that can be assimilated to a kind of action to which we can recognize the meaning of, as if it were something that were staged in a theater, that an acted reverie, an acted dream, that après coup we can recognize that it was a way, even this action, or I repeat, something like an action, it was a way to find a meaning to what was happening. I noticed now that elsewhere I have examples that are more clearer, but okay, let's read this. Gaps. Stefania told me that at that time, while working, she tried to avoid stepping on the gaps between paving stones. We commented that each of us has his own little obsessive rituals. That however strange the working of our minds seems, it is understandable that gaps between paving stones make us think of separations. Not by chance, I mean through of course a chain of symbolic equivalences. No? Not by chance, in that period, Stefania was struggling with the difficult decision between an old and secure relationship and a new and exciting one, which, however, she feared might turn her life upside down. I made her a short list of daily situations in which, with little gestures, we tried to exorcise our fears. No, so this is not... This was meant just to keep the narrative on, no? to show some interest, to develop. No? But when speaking to her, I surprised myself by using an expression which she had previously been overusing, a sort of verbal tic that I found very annoying, and in Italian is e quant'altro, no? Meaning and what you have. No? So he said ta 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 ta, e quant'altro, and then e quant'altro. It was, no, in which she had stopped using from the moment she had become aware of it. The moment somehow I had made her aware of it. But after a second, I was sorry to have used that annoying expression myself. But it was as if then après coup, I tried to understand this. It was as if a posteriori and totally unconsciously, I had finally offered her, after a lot of time, an interpretation about the possible meaning of this kind of verbal tic, which for me is more or less equivalent to an action somehow. No? It was as if we had understood together, through my verbal action, that certain repetitive modes that we use when speaking work as handrails or supports when we feel that meaning, ourselves, is wavering. That is, when we feel that our identity is threatened. Discourse is the place in which at every moment fantasies of separation or reunion with the object are brought to life. In that case, my words had a performative, active value, and it is for this that it can be called a type of corporeal or bodily or somatic reverie, a term which I usually reserve for forms of reverie dream actually acted out or mind. So in the end, the idea was that this expression somehow was used to face separation, or we might say also to deny separation, or to be stronger in front of separation. In fact, the image that came to my mind was that of the handrail. The handrail, you know what it is when you climb the stairs, you attach. Okay, let's go now to transformation in hallucinosis. Transformation in hallucinosis is a concept that you find in Bion, and he uses it in different ways. He says that there are patients who doesn't seem overtly psychotic, but they are stuck to a kind of concrete reality, and you see that almost all of what they perceive corresponds to what they massively project. This is how to use it more or less to understand certain kind of psychopathological situation. Then he said also that somehow there is this transformation in hallucinosis also in daily life, because there is always an activity of projection that we physiologically have. We cannot be totally open to the new, it would be chaos. There has always to be a play of identity and difference. But then he says also, and this is just to complicate things, that transformation in hallucinosis should be a way, a tool for the analyst, a tool the analyst has to learn to use in order to get in touch with the hallucinations of the patient. It doesn't provide many examples. That I know, only one. When he says, okay, this patient arrived, for a while I was convinced that he was not married, but then I discovered that he was married, and he says, but from the point of view of psychoanalysis, what is important to us is my idea that he was not. Because this idea of mine was, he doesn't say this, so it's also my interpretation, but this is the meaning. This idea of mine, it's a kind of dream of this patient, a kind of work of the unconscious, of my unconscious, of our unconscious, that drives our attention to an important psychic dimension of this person, but I would add also of the relationship, because in the analytic field we would ask ourselves, what does it mean if, for example, the analyst and the patient are married or not, married between inverted commas, no? And so I worked a lot on this concept, and I provided many other examples, and there was an entire debate in the international journal. I find it very, very useful. So somehow it is also a reconceptualization of the concept of lapsus or parapraxis. No? For example, when a patient does a lapsus, or even the analyst, the idea is that then you can glimpse something of what is in that kind of unconscious, no? As the big container of the impulses and so on. On the contrary, if we conceptualize these, so to say, errors in terms of transformation in hallucinosis, then we see it in a much different way, exactly as illustrated before through Bion's example, like a kind of micro dream that at a certain point the analyst has, but we should always say the analyst as belonging to the field, the analyst within the couple, about what is happening at the deep emotional and unconscious level. So it is, again, completely different. Not the destroying part of trauma bite, but the expressive part. Not the repressed unconscious, to be brief, as a jail, but the unconscious as a function of the personality. No? So, given this introduction, but I read also what I wrote, and then we have an example. So, transformation in hallucinosis is a concept which Bion developed, but which, in my opinion, only takes on real functionality within the frame of post-bionian theory of the analytic field. To see what the patient sees, Bion wrote, it is necessary to enter into a state of quasi-stupor, or at least a state something similar to that of one who is on the verge of hallucinating. This guy didn't make things simple for us. Because, you know, without memory, desire, it's already, but then when you read that it is without memory, desire, and understanding, one asks, what am I there for? And then when he says that you have to be in a kind of quasi-stupor and hallucinate, again, okay. For example, in cogitations, Bion wrote that if an analyst has the impression that the patient who is registered as being married is not, it is necessary for him to consider seriously this idea or intuition. There is also a nice example by Winnicott, but that was conscious. When he says, I don't know, maybe he had a man on his couch and he says, I see a teenager there, I see a young, no. It's almost, but you see, what is important to me is to understand that a transformation in hallucinosis, it's really almost literally a dream dreamt while being awake. So it's not the night dream, it's not reverie. Because when you have reverie, more or less, you are always conscious that you are wakeful somehow. No? And for example, we are driving the car and we have to be very attentive, and still it's a classical situation in which we also can have reveries. On the contrary, transformation in hallucinosis for me has the same timing of a dream. For a while you are in a kind of delusional, hallucinatory situation, like in a dream, and then you wake up, meaning what? That you realize the error. So, because dream, we should, I always say, when we define dream, we should say dream and when we awake. Because a dream would not be a dream if we did not awake from the dream, right? So, this is, to me, this precious quality. That's why I say that is the deepest, somehow, of all these instruments. It is the deepest tool to understand, to get in touch with the unconscious understanding of processing of what is going on. Because literally, it's a kind of dream. As we can see, this is a rather surprising formulation, especially considering that Bion had already talked about transformation in hallucinosis as a psychical mechanism analogous to denial and present in certain enigmatic and elusive descriptions of psychosis, in which the patient seemed to live in a totally concrete and thus totally inauthentic world. It is true that afterwards, to make things simpler, he had also talked about TH as a psychosis of daily life. Bion understood that transformation in hallucinosis is that which makes us hallucinate reality, or rather, that which supplies the background of familiarity on which we can perceive, without being too disturbed, elements of change or novelty. Now, It often happens that in daily work we suffer from real disperceptions or thoughts which, when confronted with the facts, reveal themselves to be false. We are in the presence of moments in which we have, so to say, hallucinated or been delusional. However, perhaps these hallucinations intervene, which of course are not true hallucinations. Here, hallucinations is used in a metaphorical way. No? The concept of hallucinosis comes from psychiatry, where it means that you are able to recognize that you are having these perceptions and the personality is conserved. These are situations where there can be some drugs, some, I think, neurological disease. So, but Bion uses it, of course, in a metaphorical meaning. So, however, perhaps these hallucinations intervene when we are most prey to the pain of not managing to understand or give meaning to things. This then creates a favorable situation in which it is as if, in the emotional digestion of reality, the projective aspect comes to absolutely dominate. While we are in the hallucination, we cannot do anything about it. However, if and when we realize that we are mistaken, and this can happen 1 minute after or 7 or 6 months later, then the hallucinosis transforms itself into dreaming. Dreaming meaning not only to immerse oneself in the hallucinations of the dream, but also to wake up. At that point, we have a symbolic form at our disposal, totally equivalent to nighttime dreams, which we can use to try to recontact the patient. The terror of the loss of meaning, of losing the interiorized object which gives meaning to experience, is overturned in the sublime experience of the epiphany of meaning. In contrast to transformation in dreaming, which, as we will see, so let's keep attention to the differences, because this was very important to me, is intentional. Transformation in dreaming is intentional, and reverie, in which we are always aware of dreaming with our eyes open. Transformation in hallucinosis, implying literally, so to say, a waking dream, is the technical instrument which makes the unconscious work the most, so to speak. For this, transformation in hallucinosis has the vividness and the force of conviction which a dream has only while we are dreaming it, and immediately after, when we are awake and still entranced by its images. The asymmetry between the position of the patient and that of the analyst lies in the fact that the latter has interiorized a fairly solid containing function, or at least it should be so. This function permits the analyst temporarily to operate in a regressive way, to remain in a situation of persecution and from which meaning is absent, and to have sufficient faith in the possibility that sooner or later a meaning could emerge. Now, let's go to another example that should help us to understand better this concept that I use very frequently, and every time I find it really productive. Sometimes very little errors. I remember a case when I was confused about who was speaking. No? There was an A, and I referred this A to the analyst, but on the contrary, it was the letter that indicated the patient. So I listened to what the patient was saying as if the analyst were talking, and there were incredible productive ideas that came out, and so and so and so. I could give you many examples. But let's read The Dead Mother, so our little homage to grief. It was early morning, and I had organized an initial meeting with Laura. She came into the office, a tiny figure with a thoughtful air and eyes wet from crying. Laura told me that she had been off sick from work for a couple of months. She had begun to suffer from anxiety, from various somatization, and from black moods. She was taking tranquilizers, but had to stop a course of antidepressants because of the side effects. She was middle-aged and had a partner, although they had not wanted to have children, and that was now weighing upon her. The event which had triggered her malaise was the rapid deterioration of her elderly mother, a woman in her 80s, who in recent months could no longer look after herself and needed a caregiver. Conflicts with her sister over how the mother should be cared for had also been part of the cause of Laura's malaise. At a certain point, perhaps thinking, will I prescribe drugs or not? I said to myself and to her that after all, she was living through a period of mourning, and that it was understandable that she was feeling this way since only a few months had passed. At that point, without indicating whether she has realized my error or whether she had accepted the idea of mourning as anyway an explanation of loss, she said to me, "But my mother isn't dead." I realized my mistake with a certain embarrassment. I was face to face with the patient, I had slept well, and I was normally attentive. How on earth had I made such a mistake? I reflected then that perhaps for Laura it was as if her mother was already dead, that perhaps the fact that she was reacting with active psychic suffering to something which had not yet happened and which was anyway in the natural order of things, the decline of parents, had so upset her because she had no internal mother to support her, that the same conflict was emphasized with the sister, makes one think that she had really been a substitute mother for Laura. Finally, this mourning that both was and was not could very well be the mourning which had been never fully carried out for the early loss of the father. Could the dead mother, then again, if we see it in terms of the analytic field, what this dream, so to say, could mean? So, could the dead mother between us stand for a certain lack of investment in Laura on my part, and therefore of receptivity, tiredness, saturation? No. So you see that to me the best tool to get that kind of poetic understanding of what is going on, meaning for poetic, somato, psychic, emotional and intellectual, is to bring everything back to the session, to the dream of the session. Why? Because if we listen in this way, immediately we are there with the patient as characters of the story. Immediately we have to take responsibility for what happens, and immediately we escape only the what could be an exclusive intellectual understanding, or even not only intellectual, an empathic understanding through conscious identification, but we feel that are there, because, oh wow, if I say this dead mother, okay, is how now our relationship, we could describe our relationship. But then I have to get out from this symmetrical level, and I have to go back to the asymmetrical level, where I am responsible and I get paid for a job, and I have to take on my shoulders this responsibility of the dead mother. So if it's me, it's not only that I discover that the patient is a dead mother in itself, but it's also me, that we are functioning in this way, and there is a lack of receptivity in my own. Then, of course, immediately, emotionally, I'm involved. So it's not there and in the past, it's here and now, you and me. And of course, if the reaction is much stronger, it's easier, I think, to try to arrive to a full understanding. That's means a poetic understanding, and that's why the tool, the main tool to get to this understanding is to work, to me, in terms of the dream of the session and of the analytic field, which means to put between parentheses the past and concrete reality. If a patient says, when I was 7 years old, this uncle that came to house, he somehow abused, okay, of course we understand the history, the drama of the patient, all the psychological consequences in terms of lack of a sense of trust in her own perceptions, but the main point becomes if we treat this abuse as a character in the field, as part of a narrative that we are developing. What is it here now? Who is abusing you? What does this mean? Because from my point of view, and from the point of view of the model of how a mind is born, I think that patient and analyst all the time are trying to recognize each other. No matter how, no matter what is the dialogue, the narrative, basically it is an image I can give you is in the movie The Sixth Sense. You remember? There is Bruce Willis, who is a psychologist, and there is a child that does not speak. And he says, well, if I say something that touches you, moves you, you feel that is right, you take 2 steps toward me. Otherwise, you go back. And you have this beautiful image, even if Bruce Willis is not maybe a good actor to play a psychologist, but you have this beautiful image of this screw that, like this, closer and less closer, closer. This is analysis, in my opinion. This is analysis. Another way I could tell you is there was an advertising in Italy of the telephone company, and which was a new subscription, a very cheap subscription, dedicated especially to teenagers. And you could activate the number, you called frequently, and you paid very, very little. It was called duetto. So you know duet, what it is in music, right? Two singers. And there was this beautiful advertising in TV. It was all the time, you love me, I love you, how much do you love me? All the time. So this is basically this is psychoanalysis, I think. Yeah? And it was very nice because at a certain point there arrived another call, and she put the first one, on hold. I said, you also love me. So, so the narrative became a bit complicated. So this is the idea, though. This is the idea. The main therapeutic factor is the moments of meetings in the here and now, through which what we get. We get, first of all, I say, a kind of primordial primary concept. When we attune with the patient or the mother with the child, there is a creation of order out of disorder. So it's not confusion, it's not fusion, because it's a play of identity and difference. It's a way to find a kind of emotional concept, a link. And this is how, step by step, the language is transmitted to the other, or a larger language meaning semiotic, semantic, and meaning. So, That's why this is an important point, because when we get, yes, we all agree that we need a full understanding, not a split, depersonalized understanding. And if we read the Paris seminar by Bion all the time, he says, okay, you have to be an artist, but what does it mean? How can an analyst be an artist? The only way I think we have to be artists, meaning to take into full account this aesthetic part of communication, is to use our tool, which is the dreaming. Now, I skip the other examples because there is no time. And I go to an example of transformation in dreaming. So, let's remember, we saw the dream during the night, the meaning of the telling of the dream, the same dream of the night in the session, then transformation in hallucinosis. Now we go to Ferris' concept of transformation in dreaming, and you will see the difference. We are indebted to Ferro for having developed this concept, which follows from the radical and rigorous way in which he conceives the setting of analysis as a theater in which everything is a fiction. A fiction, of course, which is turned inside out in order to bring to light and transform psychic reality. There is no communication of reality. See my example before, my extreme example of a traumatic memory, no? An abuse, or can be something different. There is no communication of reality which cannot be read as a waking dream, even if the recounting of a nighttime dream. That is, as a narrative derivative of waking dream thought. To transform into dreaming, premising any discourse with the phrase, I dreamt that, or rather, I am dreaming that, is an intuitive and simple way to tune into the unconscious oniric stream of the dialogue. Reality, often bidimensionally presented by the patient, immediately reacquires the vividness and rich dimensionality of a dream. To avoid falling, this is also very important, because otherwise this could give the idea that to work in this way is simple, it's kind of mechanical, ongoing translation. Not at all. To avoid falling into a mechanical form of usage, the best way of using transformation into dreaming is to have interiorized the process, the concept, the tool, to forget about it, and then to rediscover it, each time being surprised by it. So this is very important. Jim Grotz used to say, or I don't know where he wrote, that we don't have to be worried about the Bion's indication of working without memory, desire, and understanding, because then it will be memory, desire, and understanding that will come back to you when the moment arrives. And this is the same difference, for example, for the ones of you who love Proust, between voluntary memory and involuntary memory, for example. So this is the same for transformation in dreaming. We have to learn this concept, we have to deeply interiorize it and use it, but then we have to forget it. And I feel that it is true what it can tell to me only when it's conjugated to kind of surprise, something that comes out. In any case, this is the way in which we can force the oniric into the session. We can bring it in and intentionally use it also in those less inspired moments which precisely because of this can benefit from the process in order to unblock a situation of hopeless aridity. Even if used on purpose, transformation in dreaming always produces an enchanting magic. What I mean here, that sometimes you are so stuck in a situation in which everything seems concrete, boring, that this is a nice tool that can also be used somehow on purpose. I mean, okay, today I will try to listen to whatever the patient says, as if he or she had told me I had a dream. So the best way to use it is, as I said before, but sometimes, as an extreme measure, and you will see that immediately you will recover some, you will be more invested in the patient, your attention will be more alive, and so on. Let's make a very little example. Fear of flying. Anna was about to go on holiday to China for 2 weeks. She was unhappy, China, India, I don't know. She was unhappy, but no, because I don't know what...
India.
You have India, yeah, no, because I tried to, even if it's such a short vignette, in the published version I changed all the real, no, but here I think that we are far enough. Anyway, no, but there is nothing that, nowadays I always ask patients that they are, even if the absolute solution to the problem of publication does not exist, but the best way to me is to write short vignette because it's simple to respect confidentiality, and also I ask the patient more than that. Anyway, it was China. Anna was about to go on holiday to China for 2 weeks. She was unhappy about missing her sessions and was a little scared of taking the airplane. Nevertheless, once she had arrived, she told me that she was sure that she would have fun and that she would no longer miss the sessions. Well, yes, she said, it's true. She was a little anxious about the flight, but, you know, I'm going with the 3 specialists in resuscitation. 3 doctors, no, it's in Italy, it's anesthesia e rianimazione, the medical specialty. The fact is that the circumstances were true, because one was her fiancé, and 2 friends of them. So, she was in fact traveling with her fiancé and 2 other friends, all doctors who specialized in anesthesia and resuscitation. Nevertheless, what Anna told me, if we listen to it as if it were a dream, no? Let's remember, I dreamt that I was leaving for China with 3 specialists in resuscitation. You see how it changes? It changes a lot. Immediately is completely something else. That's a very different story. The 3 specialists becomes a way of telling me about her catastrophic fear of being abandoned. That is to say, living is somewhat like dying. That there were 3 is naturally a figure of discourse, an hyperbole. In analysis, it would be the expression of the fear of trusting the other, together with the belief, with the awareness of needing, but also being able to have available an extremely efficient analytic function of rescue or resuscitation. So you see how powerful it is, this very little and very easy to apply, because I think that one quality of all these tools I'm illustrating is that it's very easy to transmit them, it's very easy to learn them. Maybe not so easy, but it's easy. We can be precise in the definition of them. Now, maybe I'll stop to give room, because otherwise, if I want to read all of it, because it's already 1 hour that I'm speaking, maybe I can read just one vignette. About reverie, the Lichtenberg knife. So we quote again. Yes, but then as you want, because you have the chair. But I'd like also to give to let some room to people. But anyway, this takes five minutes. So let's give at least an example of what might be considered more of a reverie. It's halfway between reverie and association. What is the difference between reverie and association? In association, I think that there is always the link. If we say, let's associate to the glasses, I don't know, one might say glass. Glass, one might say, I don't know, a glass of water, water, river, and so on. So there is always the connection. It is important that we have these definitions, otherwise, reverie, you don't see the link, you don't see the connection. Apparently, it's something that has nothing to do with the dialogue, but still it arrives and impresses you and surprises you, and you ask, why? And there are associations that go toward a quality of reverie and vice versa. So this, I'd say, is halfway. Having asked me when our sessions began again in autumn, temporarily to reduce our sessions, having asked me when our session began again in autumn, temporarily to reduce our sessions from 3 to 1 a week, Mario told me that in the remaining session he would have trouble coming for a few weeks because he had to take his children to nursery. The thought of Lichtenberg's knife, so you see that I made my homework reading Freud, used by Freud in relation to Jung, immediately came into my head. A knife without a blade and from which the handle is missing. That was a kind of philosophical speculative joke invented by this Lichtenberg, so that Freud quotes somewhere. That is to say, there was nothing left of the analysis. No, because if you take away 3 sessions, and then the only session you say that you will not come, well, that's okay. But the image is impressive. Why the knife? Also maybe why Freud? Yes, let's see. That is to say, of course that's it, because the parasite. That is to say, there was nothing left on the analysis, or rather, the object had vanished. However, après coup, the image of the knife was nevertheless surprising. I asked myself whether what was happening was not serving to bring a certain violence into the analysis. But whose knife was it? We could ask ourselves. Mario felt himself to be threatened, and because of this had understandably taken flight. For my part, I felt attacked and realized that I had recently become rather cold towards him. The context of Freud's quote, which describes feelings of bitterness and disappointment towards his son, Jung, was not unrelated to the reverie either. Lichtenberg's knife is a way of evoking nothingness, which nevertheless leaves a trace of its disappearance, ultimately like the game of the wooden cotton reel, which Freud describes, playing with absence, or rather the perpetual alternation of appearance and disappearance from which the capacity to represent is born. Invested with strong emotions by the indications of my imminent dismissal on the part of the patient, unknowingly I tried to reconstruct a possible meaning and thus to maintain some control over things. So you see, this image, this reverie that came out was more meaningful than everything that I could have, in a cold way, tried to formulate about why this patient and so on. Because there is the powerness of the image, of something that comes from within, and it is deeply felt. If then it is true that reverie, like dreaming, puts us in direct contact with waking dream thought, then I have a way to sketch for myself a more precise map of the emotions which are ignited in the analytic field, and thus I can try to transform them. And you see how much the reference to these points in Freud's works brings, because it is the relationship between a son and a father. There is parricide, there is betrayal, there is investment, there is rage, an entire list of feelings. Well, as you have the text, I'll stop here in order to leave you at least 15 minutes for some reaction, if you do agree, because otherwise it would be too, I feel, a bit too one direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giuseppe, for your inspiring ideas and brilliance, for your courage to share with us these special moments. When you talked about slip of the tongue, about the dead mother, I thought about slip of the mind. And now I invite you all, וגם בעברית אני אגיד את זה, אני מזמינה אתכם להגיב איך שמתאים, עם אסוציאציות, עם מחשבות, עם שאלות. הנה אני רואה שיש כבר. רק איפה המיקרופון שימדוד לקהל? כן, פה.
First of all, thank you for your lectures. Now you're here?
Yes.
Maybe I'll begin with saying that what makes me very happy, that although the lectures are very rich and intellectual, still I react with feeling and not with thoughts. And the other thing is that I remember now that Francesca, Bjorn's wife, once wrote that he wanted to be a poet. And he said that the poets are saying things in a way that he would have said if he could have. So I want to ask, what Bjorn lacked, what didn't he have in order to be a poet, and to take it as a metaphor for us? What do we lack as therapists and analysts that the poets have and we don't?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I think that already we touched a bit this point, yes. Because, for example, always in Paris seminar, he speaks of a patient of his that tells him, if I had a piano, I could express yes. what I feel. And he takes this very seriously, Bjorn, because then he theorizes, but as an analyst. That's the point. What for us could be this piano or instrument to produce the music, a good music in the relationship. And in fact, also he developed this concept of the language of affectivity, a kind of language that has to reach the patient, has to touch the patient. And but it is important, again, not to use the metaphor of the artist in a vague way, but to be very precise. What does it mean for us? to try to be the artist of the relationship. And to me, it means to try to understand more and more the level of communication that, even if, as I said, concepts are always there, already there, because we are subjects. We have, and we can only be subjects if we have in us concepts, and we can say I. But to understand all the part of non-verbal, emotional, bodily communication, rhythm and sound, but in theoretical terms. In theoretical terms. So the reference to the artist and to art is wonderful because it helps us to understand a lot. And I try to say how I think that we can be artists. No? It's more a matter of receptivity than an expression. It's more a matter of being open to the discourse of the unconscious than anything else. But to be really receptive to the discourse of the unconscious, to me, means to be radical, rigorous, and really, within the session, everything can be seen as fictional in order to reach psychic reality. I say sometimes that it's a kind of phenomenological epoche. So, in order to find some new immediacy in the relationship, we put between parentheses other things to concentrate in the here and now. And I try to say also why I think this can work, because then every time we are involved. We are involved and we react in a much more intense way to what is happening. And so we use our emotions, our own body and unconscious to understand what is going on. Yes, of course, then other simple things could be said. I, for myself, created a kind of acronym to remember myself how to use my language of effectivity for myself. It's funny and serious. It's, to me, it's CREAM is the acronym, so C-R-E-M. So C stands for chorus, Greek chorus. As the title of one of Umberto Eco's books, you say almost the same thing. No? The person says, yesterday I went to the supermarket. Yesterday you went to the supermarket. Or just it's a bit like the squiggle game. But remember the example of the Greek chorus. Then we have R, use your reveries. I supervise a lot of people brings wonderful sessions, but they don't pay attention to their reveries. Many of them work as interpersonalists do. They engage very much in the relationship and do a nice kind of cognitive work, but something is lacking. E stays, of the CREAM stays for emotion. The most important intervention we can do, one of the most important, is just to precise what is the emotion at stake. The patient, I went there and it was close. Well, how disappointing can be that? Step by step, like scoring a Rorschach protocol, you say what is the emotion at stake. That is incredibly useful. M stays for metaphor. The most useful, the most important gift we can give a patient is to reformulate what the problem is with a nice and happy metaphor. It's like giving a little novel that he can read when and go back, and it's a kind of micro dream, meaning that every time you go back, it generates new meaning. So let's remember this let's say, funny acronym, but very useful. Why? Because most of the time, narcissistically, we want to tell the patient intelligent thing, important thing, explanation, nothing at all. Doesn't work. Doesn't work unless, with the exception that sometimes, if you are lucky, there is also an emotional attunement. Huh? But otherwise, what I think that what really is helpful to patient is really to be very simple, to perform this kind of mirroring, which is not easy, because the presupposition is that you are able to exercise this very sophisticated capacity for listening, this full receptivity that Bion and post-bionians try to explore, and that find incredible resistances. It's not easy, because we are stuck to our ingenuous realism. I always ask myself, I say, but why? For example, in a session, you take this on the concrete side and this not. This is not rigorous. This is arbitrary. If within the session, yeah, because there is always, the unconscious is always at work, and that is the level at which we have to work. So many times, analysts put past traumas, for example, the example of the abuse, on the past and the concrete reality, because somehow unconsciously, they don't want to take the responsibility to think of the abuse also as something happening in the here now. So that's why I'm saying that if in the end the sophistication is more on the side of receptivity, of listening, and less on the side of expression. On the side of expression, you should conversate in a human way, like more or less in a normal conversation. It's not like exactly in a normal conversation, because we have to give ourselves time, some privacy, so it's more kind of talking as dreaming, as Ogden says, but I'm sorry I took too much time.
Just to say something else, it reminds me, we have a very nice poet in Israel, her name is Agi Mishol, but I don't know to say it in Hebrew. She says that reverie, she doesn't talk about reverie, היא מדברת על בהייה, מצב של לבהות זה כשהמחשבות לא חומדות את התוכן שלהן. ואני חושבת שזה בדיוק הדבר שאם את יכולה לתרגם.
But this is very nice, because even I don't understand the meaning, but this is the best answer you can give me, because you are showing me the musicality of it. So I can say that you really understood what I'm trying to bring today. Absolutely.
אני אדבר בעברית ואת תתרגמי אותי, כי ככה יותר קל לי. יש לי שתי הערות שאני מניח מתחברות בסופו של דבר. אני מבין שהדבר המרכזי בגישה שאתה מציג זה המושג של transformations. לא יודע אם זה מקרי או לא, אבל אתה לא מתייחס להבדל שביון מתייחס, שבין transformation in O ו-transformation in K. אני מניח שיש די סיבה. I wonder אם אתה יכול, if you can explain more.
No, this is precisely the point. I mean, I'm very much into this discourse about transformation, because next year, maybe some of you will be at the big French Congress of the SPP. Next year it will be May, always May, in Genova, in Italy, and I'll be one of the two main speakers, and the theme is transformation au pluriel, so transformation, plural transformation, and I will bring my research. And so I'm very much trying to understand Bion's concept of awe, why he introduced it, and I think it's a long story, but briefly said, I think that first of all, the concept of awe reflects the change of epistemological paradigm, to be brief and even simplifying things, from the positivistic to the, so to say, postmodern paradigm. So an idea of ultimate truth, metaphysical idea, the idea that you, to a concept that truth is has to be conceived pragmatically and intersubjective. What as human beings we call truth is a product of consensuality. And consensuality doesn't mean that we sit around the table and agree on something. This consensuality is reached through many channels. Intellectual, not intellectual, any kind of factors, and so on. So, if Bion introduces the concept of awe, he gives many definitions. The main definition is thing in itself. Ding an sich, if I'm not mistaken. So it's Kant. So it is a way to say this we cannot know all. So we can never reach an ultimate truth. We know the transformations of all. So there is the idea that nobody knows how something is. Nobody has the last true interpretation. And so he introduces this idea that if the patients transform and the analysts transform, then in order not to be a kind of folie à deux, you understand this? There has to be some invariance, something that guarantees that they arrive to a certain kind of truth. So, in my opinion, and then there is an entire discourse, and this is linked to the concept of unison between mother and child and analyst and patient. But this is not enough, because they could reach their unison and still be in a situation of folie à deux. So this unison within the couple has to resonate also with a larger sociality in order as to achieve the level of a larger consensuality. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. So that's why somehow Bion renounces the idea of arriving to the letter of the unconscious, to the ultimate truth, no? And that's why he's more interested in transformations. I say that it is his own way to perform a kind of Kantian revolution. You know that they say it's a Copernican revolution, what kind did. Meaning that we cannot get, in what does the Kantian revolution consist? That Kant stopped somehow to invest the thing, what we see, and brought back the investigation to our mind. This is the Kantian Copernican revolution. Before Kant, everybody, this is simplification, but everybody, there was an idea of truth more like, they say, adequatio rei et intellectus. No, we know things as they are, and all the investigation is on things. But Kant stops at a certain point, because even if he says that we have a priori forms and concepts, he cannot explain how do we arrive. And there you find Hegel's critique to Kant. And that's why Hegel somehow continued the Kant's revolution, but also pushed it further, because he wrote the phenomenology of the Gast. So he continued to investigate our mind, how our mind knows the thing. And he gave an explanation through the concept of the dialectic of recognizing, Anerkennung, of how we can arrive to have those concepts that then become an a priori of knowledge. So it would be a long history, but the idea is that Bion is very much attuned with this discourse. Is very much within the new epistemological model that it is our epistemological model. So you see, the same passage from the thing to how the mind knows the things is Bion's passage from attention to content to attention to the container, to the processes. But I don't know if this answers a bit, but it's very long.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think we have to stop now. שוב תהיה לנו הפסקה של חצי שעה, בחג נפגשים פה חזרה. Thank you very much.